The gravel crunched under my tires, a sound that felt both ancient and accusing in the late afternoon quiet. Blackwood Manor rose from the mist-shrouded hills like a forgotten sentinel, its dark stone façade brooding beneath a sky the color of bruised plums. The estate was legendary, a relic of colonial ambition, now a designated historical landmark, its sprawling grounds rumored to hold secrets as old as its foundation stones. And now, a new secret, a fresh stain. I parked my vehicle behind a county sheriff's SUV and a nondescript sedan, the only modern intrusions on the landscape. A chill wind, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, snaked through the open window, raising gooseflesh on my arms. This was my world, the intersection of the living and the long-departed, the meticulous unearthing of truth from the silent testimony of bone and earth. My name is Seth, and I was here because Dr. Alistair Finch, a historian of considerable renown, had taken a fall. Or so they said. I nodded, offering a brief, professional smile. My reputation preceded me, often painting me as a grim figure, but I was simply precise. The detective is waiting by the west terrace, the deputy added, gesturing towards a section of the manor where the stone balustrade appeared crumbled. I walked, my gaze sweeping the grounds, taking in the manicured neglect, the ancient oaks, the faint shimmer of something metallic glinting in the grass far off. My mind, a database of past trauma and decay, was already cataloging, assessing. The air here was heavy, not just with the impending weather, but with a different kind of pressure, the kind that often accompanies sudden, unexpected death in places of great history. Both places, in their own way, held secrets worth killing for. The scene of the incident was cordoned off with yellow tape, fluttering like prayer flags in the wind. The lead detective, a stocky woman with eyes that missed nothing, turned as I approached. Seth. Thanks for getting here so quickly. She didn't offer a hand, we both knew the protocol. Preliminary assessment is an accidental fall. Finch was apparently examining some structural issues on the terrace, lost his footing. Head trauma consistent with the impact. I knelt beside the body, careful not to disturb anything outside the immediate investigative zone. Dr. Finch lay sprawled at the base of the terrace, his tweed jacket rumpled, one arm bent at an unnatural angle. The detective's explanation, while plausible on the surface, already felt too neat, too convenient. My eyes scanned the immediate vicinity. The ground was uneven, a mix of damp soil, scattered gravel, and what looked like fragments of ancient pottery shards, likely remnants from the manor's long past. I noted the precise angle of Finch's head relative to his body, the way his spectacles had landed several feet away, inexplicably pristine. A simple fall, especially from that height, would typically scatter things differently, shatter things more completely. Has anything been moved? I asked. My voice low, a quiet probe. Only what was absolutely necessary for a quick check of vitals, the detective replied. And to place the sheet. She gestured to the white sheet partially covering Finch, now folded back for my examination. I leaned closer, my gaze fixed on the victim's left hand. It was a fragment of worked bone, intricately carved, its surface smooth with age. My breath hitched. It wasn't a modern piece, not something from the manor's known collection. It looked older. Significantly older. And more importantly, it was anachronistic to this setting, to this man's known research interests which focused primarily on 18th and 19th century colonial history. My internal alarm bells began to clang. This was not just a fall. This was a narrative being constructed, and Dr. Finch, or what remained of him, was telling a different story. The detective hadn't mentioned the bone fragment. Had she even seen it? Or had she simply dismissed it as another piece of historical debris from the manor? Grounds. I carefully, almost imperceptibly, shifted my posture, obscuring the fragment from the detective's direct line of sight. It suggested a secret, a motive, and a past that refused to stay buried. My quiet work had just begun. I knelt beside the body, careful not to disturb anything outside the immediate investigative zone. His head rested against a cluster of ancient ivy, a dark stain blossoming beneath it. I didn't turn. I slipped on a fresh pair of nitrile gloves, the material stretching taut over my fingers. My portable forensic kit lay open beside me, its array of tools gleaming under the overcast sky. Finch's form, searching for the subtle narratives etched into the flesh and fabric. The fall, as reported by the estate manager, was from the stone terrace above, a distance of about 20 feet. A fatal fall, certainly. But my instincts, honed over years of dissecting death's mechanics, were already bristling. I began with a meticulous external examination. I noted the precise angle of the body, the distribution of impact injuries. The fracture in the left humerus was consistent with a fall onto a hard surface, but the unusual torsion suggested a preceding struggle, or perhaps an attempt to break a very specific kind of impact. I gently palpated the bones of the wrist, feeling for the telltale grating of fragmented bone. There, just beneath the skin, I detected a series of microscopic bone fractures along the distal radius and ulna, not the clean breaks of a direct impact, but a network of hairline cracks indicative of a twisting force, a violent wrenching motion before the final impact. These weren't the fractures of someone simply losing their footing. These were the marks of resistance, of a struggle. My jaw tightened. Moving closer, I used a specialized magnifying lens, sweeping it across the tweed jacket. The fabric was a canvas of the natural world, specks of dried mud, fragments of leaf, a stray strand of Dr. Finch's own silver hair. But then, my lens caught something else. Embedded deep within the coarse fibers of his lapel, just below the knot of his tie, were minuscule particles unlike anything naturally found on this estate. They were incredibly fine, almost like a metallic dust, with a peculiar, faint luminescence that shimmered under my inspection light. The color was a muted, almost iridescent gray, reflecting the scant light with an unnatural sheen. I carefully collected a few samples with a sterile swab, placing them into a labeled evidence bag. This wasn't granite dust from the terrace, nor soil particulate from the garden. This was something processed, something industrial, something specific. My mind immediately went through a mental database of unusual materials I'd encountered in my career. This wasn't just foreign, it was anachronistic for a historically significant estate. "What is it?" the detective asked, his voice low again, sensing my shift in focus. "Trace evidence," I replied, not looking up. "Unusual. Not native to this environment." I bagged another sample from the victim's hair, near the temple, and then scraped a tiny amount from beneath one of his fingernails. There was no doubt now. The microscopic fractures, the specific pattern of injury, and this anomalous dust. This wasn't a tragic accident. This was something far more deliberate, far more sinister. My suspicions solidified into certainty. Someone had wanted Dr. Finch dead, and they had gone to great lengths to stage it. The mineral dust was the first thread, thin but strong, leading away from the obvious. It hummed with a quiet intensity, a silent testament to another place, another activity. The next few hours were a blur of meticulous documentation, photography, and careful collection. Every fiber, every speck, every angle was recorded. The detective lingered, watching me pack my kit. He knew I had found something. He always knew. "I'll need to run these samples immediately," I told him, holding up the evidence bags containing the peculiar dust. "I have a strong initial hypothesis about their origin. It's specific." He nodded slowly, his gaze distant. "Keep me informed, Seth." My mind was already racing, piecing together the implications of the dust. It wasn't just any industrial particulate, its distinct metallic sheen and granular structure hinted at highly specialized processing, possibly involving rare earth elements or advanced conductive materials. There was only one type of facility I knew of that would generate such a unique signature in significant quantities, especially in a region like this, known more for its ancient history than its high-tech industry. A few hours later, the afternoon light was already fading as I navigated the perimeter of a sprawling, nondescript industrial park on the outskirts of the city. My initial findings had been enough to secure a preliminary warrant, citing the potential for critical, time-sensitive evidence related to Dr. Finch's death. The address was for a company known only by an alphanumeric code, listed as a data storage solutions provider. The air inside the building was frigid, a stark contrast to the damp outside. Rows upon rows of towering racks lined the corridor, each one housing banks of servers, their indicator lights winking like 1,000 watchful eyes in the dim light. The scent of ozone mingled with the sterile tang of filtered air. My breath plumed in front of me. This place felt utterly disconnected from the ancient estate, from Dr. Finch's world of historical texts and dusty archives. Yet, as I ran a gloved hand along the smooth, cool casing of a server rack, a faint residue clung to my fingertip. I pulled out my magnifying lens. It was everywhere. This wasn't a coincidence. The unique mineral dust I'd found on Dr. Finch wasn't just similar to what was here, it was identical. And something in that world had marked him for death. The tension coiled tighter in my gut. Finch, and the conspiracy it implied, was only just beginning to reveal itself. My mind was already racing, piecing together the implications of the dust. There was only one way to confirm my suspicion. I carefully collected microsamples, sealing them in sterile vials. The estate manager watched me, his expression a mixture of confusion and mild irritation. He'd clearly hoped for a quick resolution, a straightforward declaration of accident. I offered him none. "I'll need these analyzed immediately," I stated, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I'll be in touch." The journey to the analysis facility felt longer than it was, each turn of the wheels amplifying the questions swirling in my head. This wasn't the kind of residue you'd find from a casual construction project or a dusty antique. This was something specific, something engineered. The facility was a nondescript building on the outskirts of the city, its entrance guarded by a single, bored security officer. Inside, it hummed with a low, constant thrum of machinery. I presented my samples to the lead materials scientist, a woman with keen eyes behind thick spectacles. She understood the urgency without me having to elaborate. Hours later, the results landed on my secured terminal. My initial assessment had been accurate. The dust contained trace elements of neodymium and dysprosium, processed to an unusually fine particulate size, consistent with the abrasion of high-grade magnetic alloys. Alloys typically found in advanced data storage components. This detail gnawed at me. Why would such material be present at an ancient estate, clinging to the victim's clothing? The connection felt tenuous, yet persistent. The report also cross-referenced known industrial applications for such processed materials. One entry, flagged for its unusual specificity, led me down a rabbit hole of digital footprints. I navigated through a labyrinthine corridor, the air cold and sterile, smelling faintly of ozone. I wasn't here for the data itself, but for a contact, a specialist in rare earth supply chains. The specialist, a lean man with tired eyes, met me by a humming server bank. I showed him the analysis report, focusing on the unique particulate signature. He leaned closer, his brow furrowed. This specific processing. It's not common. Used for high-density magnetic storage, yes, but also for very precise geological survey equipment. Some of the prototypes are quite sensitive, requiring these specific alloys for their sensor arrays. Geological survey equipment? I pressed. Like for archaeological prospecting? He nodded slowly. Potentially. If you're looking for something deep, something hidden, you'd need the best. And those sensors, they're not cheap. They get moved around, set up in remote places. He pulled up a secure database, filtering by recent acquisitions of these specific alloy components by research institutions. One name glowed on the screen, Dr. Finch. An unsanctioned dig site. The drive was long, the paved roads eventually giving way to gravel, then little more than a dirt track winding through dense, ancient woodland. The air grew cooler, heavier. When I finally reached the coordinates, the scene was exactly as I'd pictured: a small, temporary camp, a few tents, and a meticulously excavated trench, partially covered by tarpaulins. It was isolated, almost forgotten by the world. A figure emerged from one of the tents as my vehicle crunched to a halt. It was a young woman, her face smudged with dirt, her eyes wide with apprehension. This had to be Finch's estranged research assistant. Her posture was defensive, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "I'm investigating Dr. Finch's death." Her gaze flickered. Did he? I moved closer, slowly, deliberately. I found something on him. A specific type of industrial dust. My analysis suggests it's related to advanced geological survey equipment. Equipment that, according to records, Dr. Finch recently acquired. For this site, I presume? She recoiled slightly, her eyes darting towards the excavated trench. We were just doing some preliminary work. Nothing official. Unofficial work that required state-of-the-art sensors made with rare earth alloys? I kept my voice even, but my internal pressure was building. That's a significant investment for preliminary work. What exactly were you looking for, and why was Dr. Finch so secretive about it? She wrung her hands, her gaze fixed on a distant point beyond my shoulder. He changed. After he found the first fragments, he became obsessed. He called it the lost artifact. Said it would rewrite history. What fragments? I pressed, my voice dropping to a low, insistent tone. And who was he meeting with? Enigmatic figures, the logs described them as. Her eyes snapped back to mine, wide with a sudden, raw fear. She swallowed hard, her throat bobbing. They weren't like us. They spoke in riddles, about legacies and ancient pacts. Dr. Finch started meeting them away from the estate, in remote places. He said they were guardians. He was convinced they held the key to unlocking the artifact's true power. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken danger. Guardians. Ancient pacts. The pieces were starting to coalesce into a disturbing image, far more complex than a simple fall. The dust, the dig site, the assistant's fear, it all pointed towards a conspiracy rooted in something profoundly ancient, yet connected by the most modern of materials. My next move had to be precise. The estate's sprawling grounds felt different under the harsh morning sun, less a place of tragic accident and more a stage for something calculated. I drove past the main house, the stone façade still echoing the prior day's grim discovery, and followed a narrow, rutted track toward the rear of the property. Finch's research notes had detailed a secondary archaeological dig, a minor excavation focused on a medieval outbuilding, not far from the bluff where he'd fallen. The archaeologist in charge, a woman named Eleanor, had been polite but wary when I contacted her, hinting at delays and unexpected complications. Now, I saw why. The site looked less like a carefully maintained dig and more like a hastily abandoned project. Tarpaulins lay crumpled at the edge of the trench, not neatly folded. Tools, trowels, brushes, a sieve were scattered, some half buried in loose soil, rather than stored in their designated boxes. I stepped into the trench, my boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. The usual stratigraphic layers, meticulously catalogued by Eleanor, were visible, but here and there, the soil was too fresh, too disturbed. Someone had been digging recently, and not with the systematic precision of an academic team. I ran my gloved hand over a patch of exposed subsoil. The texture was wrong, too loose, as if it had been backfilled only hours ago. This wasn't the work of archaeologists. This was hurried, clandestine. Near a partially exposed stone foundation, where Eleanor's team had been documenting a hearth, I saw it. A sliver of fired clay, barely an inch across, half buried in the loose soil. It was dark, almost black, with a faint, iridescent sheen. I carefully plucked it from the earth. The surface was smooth, polished, unlike the rough, utilitarian pottery I'd expect from a medieval English manor. This fragment, with its almost obsidian-like quality and subtle, geometric etching, belonged to no known period of local archaeology. It was anachronistic, a misplaced shard from another time, another world entirely. Finch hadn't just been researching history, he'd been excavating something far older, and it seemed someone else had been too. I pocketed the fragment, a cold knot forming in my stomach. Just then, a patrol car crunched up the track. The lead detective, a man whose patience had worn thinner with each of my inquiries, stepped out. His face was a mask of practiced annoyance. "Still here, Seth," he grumbled, approaching the trench. "Thought you'd be done picking apart that poor man's bones by now." "We're getting calls from the mayor's office. They want this wrapped up. The official report on Finch's fall is ready for sign-off." A fall doesn't leave behind pottery from an unknown culture, I stated, holding up the tiny fragment. And it certainly doesn't involve someone else digging up the site after the fact. He squinted at the shard. then waved a dismissive hand. Could be anything. Kid dropped it. Old tourist souvenir. You're chasing ghosts, Seth. We've got a clear accident here. No signs of struggle, no defensive wounds, just a man who lost his footing. You found no signs of struggle because the body was moved, I countered, my voice low but firm. And the toxicology report is still pending. This isn't a simple fall, detective. Finch was investigating something, and this dig site is connected. Connected to what? A broken piece of pot? Look, I've got a stack of paperwork, and my superintendent is breathing down my neck. We're closing this. Unless you have definitive proof of foul play, something concrete, not just theories about old dirt and strange ceramics, then this is done. His words were a wall, impenetrable, clearly stemming from pressure far beyond his own office. The message was clear, my time was up. Leaving the dig site, the lead detective's words echoed in my head. Definitive proof. The pottery fragment was a start, but it wasn't enough to sway a system determined to bury the truth. I needed to connect Finch's research, the cryptic warnings, and now this illicit digging, to something tangible. My mind went to the digital breadcrumbs Finch might have left. I drove directly to a secure off-site facility I sometimes used for sensitive data analysis, a place removed from my main lab. The air was frigid, smelling faintly of ozone and dust, a constant hum vibrating through the raised floor. Rows of server racks stretched into the distance, their indicator lights a mesmerizing, silent symphony of green and amber. I found an unoccupied terminal, logged in, and began to re-examine Finch's digital footprint. I focused my search on financial transactions, looking for any unusual transfers, offshore accounts, or cryptocurrency movements that might be linked to the illicit trade mentioned in Finch's notes. I cross-referenced dates with the periods of reported disturbances at the dig site. The sheer volume of data was overwhelming, but I knew what I was looking for: anomalies. It was like trying to find a single grain of sand in a desert, but I was persistent. The more I dug, the more I realized the scale of the operation Finch had stumbled upon. It wasn't just about ancient artifacts, it was about power, influence, and the systematic control of historical narratives. It was well past midnight when I finally left the data center, my eyes gritty, my head throbbing with information. The city streets were quiet, slick with a fine mist. I pulled up to my forensic lab, a converted warehouse in a less trafficked part of town. As I approached the main entrance, something felt off. The padlock on the heavy steel door was still in place, the security seal I'd applied earlier that morning unbroken. But as I pushed the door open, a subtle shift in the air, a faint, almost imperceptible scent that wasn't mine, prickled at my senses. The main lab was undisturbed at first glance. My microscopes sat where I'd left them, the evidence lockers sealed. But then I saw it. Not messy, not ransacked. Just moved. A single sheet, an article on Bronze Age funerary rites, was turned upside down. Nothing was taken, nothing broken. The intruder hadn't wanted to steal, they wanted to send a message. They knew. They knew I was still digging. The lead detective's dismissal, the anonymous warnings, the illicit digging, and now this. The game had just become deadly serious, and I was no longer just an observer. I was a target. The detective's words, heavy with finality, echoed in my head long after the cruiser's tail lights vanished down the winding estate drive. unless you have definitive proof. He wanted certainty, a smoking gun, not the whisper of anomalies I'd presented. But I had proof, just not the kind that fit neatly into his department's quick-close files. My gut, honed by years of sifting through the Earth's silent stories, screamed foul play. Finch hadn't simply stumbled. I returned to my makeshift lab, a quiet corner of the estate's guest house I'd commandeered. The pottery fragment, no bigger than my thumb, lay under the microscope, bathed in the cool glow of the LED ring light. On the surface, it appeared unremarkable, a shard of what could easily be a common vessel from the early Bronze Age, its surface etched with rudimentary geometric patterns and encrusted with centuries of mineral deposits. But the anomalies I'd noticed at the scene, the ones the detective had dismissed as old dirt, were far more specific. Under high magnification, the telltale signs began to emerge. The clay composition, while skillfully aged, contained trace elements that didn't quite align with known ancient sources for this particular region. More damning were the microscopic tool marks. They weren't the coarse, irregular impressions left by primitive firing and shaping techniques. Instead, I detected a uniformity, a subtle precision in the striations on the internal surface that whispered of modern machinery, of controlled environments. It was an incredibly sophisticated piece of work, a forgery so cunning it would fool all but the most dedicated specialist. This wasn't just a fake, it was a masterpiece of deception. This revelation didn't just complicate Finch's death, it twisted it into something far more sinister. Finch wasn't merely researching ancient artifacts, he was uncovering a high-stakes forgery ring, one capable of producing pieces so convincing they could infiltrate the most secure collections, perhaps even rewrite history. His tragic fall suddenly made a terrible, terrifying kind of sense. He hadn't been an academic poring over dusty texts, he'd been an investigator, and he'd gotten too close. The urgency to understand the full scope of Finch's work intensified. The detective was closing the case. I had no time to waste. I left the fragment, its silent testimony now screaming, and headed back to Finch's study. The previous search had been perfunctory, focused on the immediate aftermath of his death. Now, I looked with new eyes, seeing not a scene of tragedy, but a battlefield of intellect. Finch, a man obsessed with hidden truths, would have had contingency plans, a place to squirrel away his most dangerous findings. I systematically worked my way through the room, starting with the massive oak desk, its surface still cluttered with notes and obscure historical texts. I checked for false bottoms, loose panels, anything out of place. Nothing. I ran my hands along the spines of books on the towering shelves, feeling for a switch, a hidden catch. The scent of old paper and dust filled my nostrils, a comforting aroma that now felt charged with a different kind of tension. My gaze fell upon a peculiar antique globe, its brass stand tarnished, its paper map faded in places. It was the only item in the study that felt truly out of time, more decorative than functional. I gave it a spin. It rotated smoothly. Then, I noticed a slight resistance when the island of Cyprus passed a particular point on the meridian. A faint click, almost imperceptible. I pushed, gently, at the point of resistance. My pulse quickened, a drumbeat against my ribs. This was it. Inside, nestled on a felt-lined shelf, I found a small, waterproof pelican case and a leather-bound journal. The case contained a cluster of solid-state drives, no bigger than my thumb, clearly encrypted, and a single, heavy-gauge USB stick. The journal, its pages brittle, wasn't a diary. On the inside cover, taped beneath a faded photograph of an archaeological dig, was a folded piece of parchment. I carefully unfolded it. With modern annotations, small, hand-drawn server icons, lines connecting various points. A sequence of alphanumeric characters scrawled in Finch's distinctive hand: 010010101010101010101010101000100010001000100010001000100010001000100010001000 0100101010101001. Binary. It spelled out storage key. The sheer audacity of it all was breathtaking. Finch hadn't just stumbled onto a forgery ring, he'd been deep inside it, gathering evidence, meticulously documenting every facet. The encrypted drives, the coded map, the binary message, they were a breadcrumb trail, leading to something monumental. My immediate thought was decryption. But these weren't standard files. Finch had been too careful. The sophistication of the forgeries suggested a network of immense resources, and the protection of his data would be equally robust. My limited forensic tools wouldn't cut it. I needed specialized equipment, a secure environment, something beyond the reach of conventional scrutiny. My eyes fell on one of Finch's notes, a single loose sheet tucked into the journal. The pieces clicked into place with an unsettling finality. Finch had hidden his most explosive data in a digital fortress, a place designed to safeguard information from all but the most determined, or the most knowledgeable. He wasn't just exposing a ring, he was exposing its financial backbone, its digital infrastructure. I secured the Pelican case and the journal, my mind racing. Finch had used a highly specialized, off-site data storage facility, a place where digital assets were kept offline, away from the vulnerabilities of the internet. A place I now had to infiltrate. The address led me to the industrial edge of the city, a district of anonymous warehouses and humming power lines. The building itself was nondescript, a monolithic concrete cube with no windows and a single, heavy steel door. Finally, a final, heavy door slid open, revealing the heart of the operation. The air was frigid, the temperature precisely controlled, tasting faintly of ozone. The hum of the cooling systems was a constant, low roar, a white noise that swallowed all other sound. This was where the real wealth of the digital age was held, where fortunes were secured, and secrets were kept. And somewhere within this labyrinth of technology, Finch's final, damning evidence lay locked away, waiting to be unearthed. I clutched the Pelican case tighter, the weight of Finch's dangerous legacy pressing down on me. I was in. Now, I just had to find it. The rhythmic hum of 1,000 servers was a low, constant thrum against my eardrums, punctuated by the whisper of cooling fans. Rows of blinking lights, green, amber, blue, danced across the faces of the machines, a silent, digital symphony of processing power. This was where I'd brought Finch's encrypted drives, a fortress of computation designed to protect secrets, and now, to prise them open. I'd set up my workstation amidst the towering racks, the monitors casting an eerie glow on my determined face. Finch's initial encryption was robust, a professional job, but not impenetrable to someone who understood the architecture of digital defense. I leaned into the task, fingers dancing across the keyboard, a familiar comfort despite the unfamiliar territory of Finch's digital labyrinth. Lines of code scrolled down the screen, a language I spoke fluently, each character a potential key, each algorithm a lock to be picked. Hours blurred into a single, focused effort. My initial breakthrough came with a ripple effect, a cascade of green text confirming access. The first layer peeled back, revealing a directory structure that was meticulously organized, almost obsessively so. It wasn't just random files, it was a curated archive. Next, I turned my attention to the coded map. It wasn't a simple image file. It was an interactive overlay, a grid of geographic coordinates interwoven with historical dates and obscure symbols. It required more than just decryption, it needed interpretation, a forensic approach to cartography. Finch had used a multi-layered cipher, one that blended historical chronology with cryptographic keys. I cross-referenced dates with known archaeological discoveries, architectural styles with regional geology, and slowly, painstakingly, the map began to yield its secrets. Beneath the geographical markers, fragmented text began to emerge, cryptic phrases like Sanctuary of the First Light and the Obsidian Archive. This wasn't just about stolen artifacts, it was about specific, chosen locations, places with their own stories. But the real meat lay within the heavily encrypted files of the legacy folder. The hum of the servers seemed to intensify, a collective gasp as the encryption finally shattered. The first document that opened was a manifesto of sorts, written in elegant, archaic prose. It outlined their methods: subtle manipulation of historical records, strategic acquisition of genuine artifacts, and the meticulous crafting of forgeries to discredit inconvenient truths. Their goal wasn't profit from fake antiquities, but control over the past itself, shaping the present by dictating what was remembered and what was forgotten. I scrolled through hundreds of documents, each one a nail hammered into the coffin of conventional history. There were ledgers detailing transactions of priceless, genuine artifacts, often disguised as mundane sales of unrelated items. There were encrypted communications discussing disinformation campaigns targeting historians who got too close to certain truths. One file contained a detailed analysis of how a particular historical narrative, widely accepted today, had been meticulously constructed over centuries, a tapestry woven with threads of truth and intentional fabrication. The implications were staggering. Finch's death wasn't a tragic fall, it was a calculated silencing. He hadn't just exposed a black market, he'd threatened to unravel a carefully constructed reality. The scope of this conspiracy stretched far beyond anything I had initially imagined. Wealthy collectors, influential academics, even figures within governmental institutions, their names appeared, sometimes in code, sometimes explicitly, throughout the documents. They weren't just patrons, they were active participants, beneficiaries of this historical manipulation. My fingers paused, hovering over the keyboard. I felt a profound sense of isolation, surrounded by machines and the ghosts of forgotten truths. The weight of Finch's discoveries settled on my shoulders, heavy and suffocating. He hadn't just been collecting evidence, he'd been building a case against an entire edifice of power and deception. And now, I was holding the blueprint. Rows of blinking lights, green, amber, blue, danced a silent, frantic ballet across the stacked units, each one a testament to the colossal processing power housed within. The sheer scale was staggering, far beyond what a single historian's research could require. What truly snagged my attention, however, wasn't the numbers themselves, but the metadata, the faint digital footprints left behind. One of them, a coastal property known for its reclusive owner, stood out. It was a name I'd heard Dr. Finch mention in passing, a place he'd alluded to in his notes as a potential key to a historical anomaly he was tracking.
More critically, nestled deep within a seemingly innocuous spreadsheet of research grants, was an email alias, Archivist Prime.
It was an old, almost archaic handle, and it instantly conjured the image of a man I hadn't thought of in years. The retired curator, a former mentor to Dr. Finch, a man who had practically invented the field of artifact authentication in our region. He was a stickler for provenance, a walking encyclopedia of lost histories and dubious acquisitions. A tight knot of unease began to form in my gut. This wasn't just about Dr. Finch's fall anymore. This was about something larger, something systemic. I extracted what I could, transferring the crucial data to a secure drive before disengaging from the terminal. The air here smelled of aged paper, leather, and brewing tea. He settled into a worn armchair, a tartan blanket draped over his knees, as I laid out my findings from the estate, the anachronistic details, the unique mineral dust, the peculiar damage to Dr. Finch's remains, and now, the digital trail. Dr. Finch was chasing something big, I stated, keeping my voice level, watching his reaction. Something that put him in a data center, not a library. Something that ended with him broken at the foot of a cliff. I paused, letting the implications settle. That alias. It sounded like something you might have used, back in the day. The curator's gaze sharpened, his lips pressing into a thin line. He didn't deny it. A youthful indiscretion, perhaps. A rather dramatic nom de guerre for a young academic trying to make a name for himself in the nascent world of digital archiving. His voice was raspy, laced with a weariness that went beyond his years. But you're not here to discuss my past, Seth. Evidence of a highly organized operation. The mineral dust, for instance. It's a specific composition, rare, found only in a few places globally. One of them, I suspect, is the private estate I mentioned earlier, the coastal property Dr. Finch was tracking. I pushed a printout of the mineral analysis across the polished wood table. This dust was on Dr. Finch's clothes, embedded in his skin. It wasn't from the estate where he died. He picked up the paper, his eyes scanning the chemical compounds. A slow, almost imperceptible nod. Too brilliant, perhaps. He had a way of seeing the threads connecting disparate pieces of history, weaving them into a tapestry others couldn't perceive. He looked up, his gaze meeting mine, and I saw a flicker of fear in their depth. He was getting too close to the keepers. The name hung in the air, a heavy, unarticulated weight. He sighed, a long, shuddering breath. Not a myth, Seth. They are real. A society, ancient in its roots, powerful in its reach. They don't just preserve history, they control it. They manipulate archaeological finds, suppress inconvenient truths, and finance their operations through the illicit trade of artifacts. For political leverage, for financial gain, for the preservation of a certain narrative. He paused, his eyes drifting to a dusty shelf filled with ancient texts. Finch believed they were preparing for a major reveal, something that would rewrite entire chapters of our understanding of the past. He thought they operated from a specific location, a place of historical significance, a private estate with unique geological features. My mind raced, connecting the dots. The anachronistic details, the mineral dust, the digital transactions, and now, the keepers. The coastal estate. It all began to coalesce into a terrifyingly clear picture. Doctor and the mineral dust wasn't just evidence of a different location, it was a signature, a geographical fingerprint pointing directly to the heart of this clandestine operation. The retired curator's reluctance melted into a grim determination, an unspoken warning. I was no longer just investigating a death, I was unraveling a legacy, a dangerous secret that someone was willing to kill to protect. My next destination was clear, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that it wouldn't be without risk. The coastal wind whipped at my jacket, carrying the scent of salt and damp earth. Elias Thorne's estate loomed on the bluff, a monolithic structure of glass and dark stone, utterly out of place against the wild, ancient landscape. My mind still buzzed with the fragmented intel, the keepers, the mineral dust, the digital transactions. Finch hadn't just fallen, he'd been murdered, a sacrifice to a secret I was now determined to expose. I'd spent the last 24 hours studying satellite imagery, topographical maps, and Thorne's known habits. He was a creature of routine, but his property's defenses were anything but predictable. Laser grids, pressure plates, thermal sensors, it was a fortress. But fortresses always had blind spots, often in their very design. I moved like a shadow, using the uneven terrain and the shifting fog as my allies. My bag was light, containing only the essentials, a multi-tool, a small camera, a lockpicking set, and a high-frequency signal jammer. The perimeter fence was a tangle of electrified wire, but a section near a crumbling retaining wall showed signs of recent repair, hastily done. A weak link, perhaps a temporary patch after a storm. I used the insulated cutters, the snip a dull thud swallowed by the wind. Slipping through, I hugged the treeline, moving towards the rear of the main building, where the terrain sloped sharply towards the sea. Thorne's penchant for grandiosity meant large, often less monitored service entrances. I found it, a reinforced door, tucked away beneath an overhang, clearly designed for deliveries. No cameras immediately visible, but I knew they were there, hidden. I deployed the jammer, a silent hum emanating from the device, scrambling any signals in a tight radius. The lock was a digital keypad, but my tools were designed for more than just pins and tumblers. A small optical sensor read the residual heat patterns from recent key presses. A few moments of careful analysis, a sequence entered, and the heavy door clicked open with a faint hiss of air. A long, utilitarian corridor stretched before me, lit by harsh fluorescent tubes. The air here was still, carrying a faint, metallic tang. I moved quickly, my footsteps muffled by the heavy-duty flooring. One door, however, stood ajar, a sliver of bright light escaping into the gloom. This was no ordinary workshop. The air was thick with the acrid scent of solvents, resins, and something else, a faint, earthy aroma. Workbenches lined the walls, littered with specialized tools, microchisels, fine brushes, high-magnification microscopes. Half-finished pieces lay scattered about, a ceramic shard with freshly applied pigment mimicking ancient glazes, a bronze figurine undergoing an artificial patina process, a small, intricate carving that looked uncannily like a genuine Roman artifact, yet felt wrong. This was a forgery workshop, operating at an industrial scale, but with an artisan's precision. My eyes scanned the surfaces, landing on a small vial of mineral dust, almost identical to the residue I'd found on Finch's clothing. My gaze drifted to a section of the wall that seemed too perfect, too seamless. A subtle change in the grout lines, a faint discrepancy in the wall texture. There was something behind it. I pressed along the seam, searching for a release. A vault. The air inside was cool, dry, and carried the unmistakable scent of aged materials. My light swept across shelves, revealing a breathtaking display. Not forgeries, but genuine articles. Pottery from the Aegean, bronze tools from the early dynastic period, scrolls of papyrus brittle with age, delicate jewelry glistening with ancient gold. These weren't reproductions, they were the real thing, priceless artifacts, clearly plundered from legitimate archaeological sites. The mineral dust wasn't just evidence of a forgery operation, it was the signature of the sites they were raiding. My camera flashed silently, capturing image after image, documenting the sheer audacity of it all. My fingers trembled as I reached for a small clay tablet, cuneiform script etched into its surface. It was authentic, impossibly old, stolen. A pressure plate? A laser tripped? My jammer had failed, or they had a countermeasure. I heard the distant thud of heavy boots, growing louder. Thorne's security. I spun around, slamming the camera back into my bag. The wall panel was already beginning to slide shut, the mechanism groaning. The workshop was now bathed in an emergency red glow. Alarms blared, a piercing shriek that vibrated through the floor. I sprinted back down the corridor, the boots now closer, voices shouting. The digital lock I'd bypassed earlier was now displaying a flashing red alert. I didn't have time to re-engage the jammer. I veered right, into an unexpected branch of the corridor. The passage opened into a vast, humming space. Thousands of tiny lights pulsed in unison, a digital heartbeat. This was the nexus of Thorne's illicit financial operations, the nerve center for the transactions funding the keepers. A security guard, a burly figure in tactical gear, rounded the corner behind me, shouting into a headset. Intruder in Sector C. Moving to the data core. I didn't hesitate. The guard hesitated, momentarily disoriented by the maze of hardware. I wove through the narrow aisles, the blinking lights a dizzying blur, the hum of the machines a frantic pulse in my ears. The sheer scale of it was staggering. They were closing in. I spotted an emergency exit, a green glow at the far end of the aisle. It was a gamble, but my only option. I burst through the emergency door, the night air a welcome shock, the alarm sirens now a fading shriek behind me. I had the evidence, but I had also just declared war. I didn't hesitate. I vaulted over a low railing, landing lightly between two server racks, the chill air biting at my face. My fingers tightened around the encrypted drive I'd snatched. A heavy boot scraped concrete behind me. He was recovering, adapting. I ducked under a thick bundle of cables, the dust motes dancing in the faint emergency lights. The air grew colder, the hum intensified. I could feel the guard's presence drawing closer, a heavy breath in the metallic air. I spotted a fire exit, a red rectangle glowing faintly in the distance. My legs burned as I pushed harder, ignoring the protest of my muscles. I didn't stop until the sirens were a distant memory, a phantom echo in the city's awakening hum. My temporary sanctuary was a rented, nondescript room above a defunct print shop, chosen for its anonymity and the stout lock on its door. The windows were grimy, overlooking a brick wall, but it was safe enough for now. The encrypted drive slid into its port. My fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing layers of encryption, the digital locks yielding one by one. The data spilled forth, ledgers, communications, schematics, digital photographs. It was a deluge, but I was ready for it. I arranged my workspace meticulously, a forensic surgeon preparing for a complex operation.
On one side, my laptop glowed, displaying the newly acquired digital trove.
On the other, printouts of my own photographic evidence from Finch's estate lay spread out, macro shots of the soil particles from Thorne's boots, magnified images of the unique textile fibers I'd lifted from the antique tapestry, the precise measurements of the indentation on the fireplace hearth. The first thread connected with a quiet click in my mind. But the accompanying manifests, buried deep within a subfolder, listed items with an unsettling specificity: fragment, obsidian, unknown provenance, first C and scroll, vellum, damaged, script unverified. These weren't general art pieces. They were artifacts, precisely the kind Finch had been obsessed with, and the kind I'd suspected Thorne was trafficking. Then came the communications. Encrypted messages, cross-referenced with timestamps and IP addresses, revealed a network, not just of buyers and sellers, but of individuals with a shared purpose. I pulled up the metadata from the images I'd taken at Thorne's estate. The unique pattern of soil particles embedded in the treads of Thorne's boots, which I had carefully photographed, now found its echo in a digital photograph on the drive, a remote excavation site, geotagged to a forgotten valley known for its Roman-era ruins. The soil composition matched. Thorne wasn't just a recipient, he was a participant in the acquisition. The true breakthrough, the reveal that solidified everything, came from a series of schematics. They detailed a complex system of hidden compartments and reinforced passages beneath a centuries-old structure, Finch's estate. My mind flashed back to the subtly altered stone in the library, the faint scent of disturbed earth I'd noted. These schematics weren't just blueprints, they were a roadmap to Finch's secret world, and a target for those who sought to exploit it. The indentation, I now realized, wasn't from a fall. It was from a heavy object being pried loose, the kind of leverage needed to force open a concealed compartment. Thorne's username, clearly identified, discussed securing the last piece and neutralizing the resistance. Resistance could only have meant Finch. The anachronistic details I'd found, the faint, unique chisel marks on the dislodged stone, the specific type of adhesive residue, now made perfect sense. They weren't accidental, they were the clumsy but deliberate work of someone dismantling a hidden mechanism, someone who knew exactly what they were looking for, but perhaps wasn't as meticulous as Finch himself. Thorne hadn't just pushed Finch, he had gone there to take something, and Finch had stood in his way. Thorne, a respected historian, was not merely involved in the illicit trade, he was a central figure in the Keepers, a clandestine network dedicated to controlling ancient artifacts and, by extension, historical narratives. Finch's death wasn't a tragic fall, it was a calculated murder, a direct consequence of his opposition to Thorne and the Keeper's agenda. My breath hitched. I had it. An unassailable forensic case. The photographic evidence from the estate, the trace evidence meticulously collected, and now, the irrefutable digital footprint of Thorne's involvement. It was all here, laid bare. I knew the police force was compromised. The initial rush to judgment, the convenient dismissal of my early concerns, the subtle pushback from the lead detective, it all made sense now. The Keepers had influence, perhaps reaching higher than I could imagine. Presenting this evidence to the wrong person would not only be futile, it would be a death sentence. I stared at the screen, the names and dates blurring into a tapestry of conspiracy. My hands were steady, my resolve hardened. There was no turning back now. I had to choose my next move with absolute precision. My life depended on it. More importantly,
The truth depended on it.
I began to compile a concise, irrefutable dossier, every piece of evidence cross-referenced, time-stamped, and digitally secured. The fight was far from over.
It had only just begun.
The frantic hum of the servers was a chaotic symphony around me, a soundscape of digital commerce and hidden secrets. My landing was clumsy, but I recovered quickly, my eyes already scanning the dense rows of machinery. The guard, a hulking shadow in the peripheral glare of status lights, was still trying to triangulate my position.
He wouldn't have anticipated a vault. Most people, I knew, froze. I ran.
I plunged deeper into the maze of the data center aisle, cold wallets and blinking servers. The air here was frigid, a sharp contrast to the stale warmth of the manor above, carrying the metallic tang of ozone. I wove through the narrow channels, my footsteps muffled by the industrial carpeting, the rhythmic whir of cooling fans a relentless pulse in my ears. The guard's heavy boots echoed behind me, closer than I liked. He was moving with purpose now, no longer disoriented, adapting to the confined space. I ducked behind a particularly dense bank of storage units, the cold metal biting at my shoulder as I pressed against it. I could hear his heavy breathing, the faint scrape of his uniform. I needed a distraction, something to buy me time. My gaze darted around, settling on a maintenance panel, its screws slightly loose. A desperate gamble, but I had little choice. With a quick, practiced movement, I twisted the panel open, exposing a tangle of wires. My fingers flew, disconnecting a power cable from one of the main racks. Immediately, a cascade of alarms blared, a piercing shriek that cut through the hum. The guard roared, startled, and I seized the moment. My objective wasn't just escape. Dr. Finch's cryptic notes, the anachronistic details on his remains, Thorne's carefully curated collection, it all pointed to a deeper, more organized illicit trade. It was a long shot, but my gut screamed it was worth investigating. I found the rack, a behemoth labeled Archive 07, its remaining lights glowing steadily. The scratch, thin as a cat's claw, was there, just as I remembered, leading to a small, almost invisible seam in the metal paneling. This wasn't standard issue. Thorne had modified it. With my multi-tool, a forensic anthropologist's best friend, I worked quickly, prying at the seam. It gave with a soft click, revealing not more circuitry, but a narrow, deep compartment, cleverly disguised. Inside, nestled amongst layers of anti-static foam, were two items. The first was a leather-bound ledger, its pages filled with elegant, precise script detailing transactions, dates, amounts, and coded references to artifacts and depositories. The names weren't prominent, but the amounts were astronomical, clearly indicating high-value items changing hands. The second item, however, stole my breath. It was a small, intricately carved obsidian shard, no larger than my thumb. Its surface was impossibly smooth, etched with symbols I recognized from Dr. Finch's research, symbols he believed belonged to a forgotten, pre-dynastic culture. And there, embedded in the obsidian, was a microscopic fleck of the same unique, anachronistic resin I'd found on Dr. Finch's body, a resin that shouldn't have existed in that era. This wasn't just a valuable artifact, it was the artifact, the proof of provenance, the key to unlocking the entire conspiracy. Finch had been close to exposing this very piece. A shadow fell over me, not the guard this time, but a figure whose silhouette was unmistakable. "Looking for something, Seth?" Thorne's voice was smooth, devoid of anger, which made it all the more chilling. He stood at the end of the aisle, a slight smile playing on his lips, his hands clasped casually behind his back. The guard was nowhere in sight, likely dealing with the alarm. I straightened, clutching the ledger and the obsidian shard.
I found it, Thorn. All of it.
My voice was steadier than I felt, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs.
The ledger, the obsidian. The anachronistic resin.
It all points to the illicit trade, the keepers, and Dr. Finch's murder.
He knew too much about this piece, didn't he? About its true origins and where it was headed.
Thorn took a slow step forward, his eyes fixed on the obsidian in my hand. A clever man, Dr. Finch. Too clever, perhaps.
Some truths are best left undisturbed, Seth.
They belong to a select few, those who understand their true value, their potential. He gestured around the data center. This infrastructure, this entire estate, exists to protect and preserve that legacy. A legacy you threaten with your quaint notions of justice. Justice for a colleague who was murdered because he stood in your way, I countered, my grip tightening on the evidence.
He wasn't protecting a legacy, Thorn.
He was exploiting history, selling off pieces of the past to the highest bidder, fabricating narratives to justify your greed.
Greed?
Thorn scoffed, taking another step.
No, Seth. Preservation. We are the custodians of true history, not the academics who dilute it with their theories.
This obsidian, for instance. Its power, its significance, would be lost in a museum, reduced to a mere curiosity. Here, it is understood. It is valued. His eyes, usually so calm, now held a glint of something dangerous. You've seen the depths of our operation. You know the extent of our reach. Do you truly believe you can walk away with that? He took another step, closing the distance. The air thickened with unspoken threat. I knew he wouldn't simply let me leave. My only chance was to expose him, and fast. The hum of the remaining servers seemed to mock me, a reminder of the pervasive power I was up against. I had the smoking gun, but Thorn still held the trigger. The air crackled, thick with the unspoken threat of the man standing before me. He moved, a predator confident in his domain, and I knew the time for subtlety was over. My mind raced, searching for an escape, a final move that would bring his meticulous empire crashing down. I had the evidence, nestled in a secure data burst device in my pocket, but I needed to get it out. As his hand twitched towards his waist, I reacted. My gaze flickered to the antique porcelain vase on a nearby pedestal, a relic of the estate's long history. It was heavy, ornate, and utterly fragile. With a guttural cry, I lunged, not at him, but past him, sweeping the vase from its perch. It shattered against the polished marble floor with a deafening crack, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the silent hall. Shards flew, skittering across the floor, one piece grazing his cheek. He recoiled, a flicker of surprise, then rage, distorting his features. That split second was all I needed. My hand plunged into my jacket pocket, thumb finding the recessed button on the small device. A single, silent click. The data, the meticulously compiled evidence of his network, the stolen identities, the illicit trade, and the true history of the keepers, was now airborne, a digital whisper transmitted to a prearranged contact. The signal was weak, designed to be fleeting, but it was enough. It's done, I stated, my voice hoarse but firm, meeting his furious gaze. Your legacy, the one you tried to bury and rewrite, is now exposed." His eyes narrowed, a cold, calculating fury replacing the initial shock. He understood. He took another step, but the moment for a clean, silent elimination had passed. Sirens, distant at first, then growing louder, cut through the quiet of the estate. The contact had received the signal. My gamble had paid off. The subsequent hours blurred into a whirlwind of uniformed figures, flashing lights, and clipped questions. The estate, once a bastion of quiet history, became a hive of activity. The local law enforcement, initially skeptical, quickly found themselves overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the operation I had uncovered. Rows of racks stretched before me, each server a silent sentinel guarding countless bytes of information. A forensic technician, him fingers flying across a keyboard, pointed to a screen. "This is it, Seth," he said, his voice barely audible over the whirring fans. "The primary ledger. Encrypted, but we're making headway. It confirms everything you claimed. The shell corporations, the offshore accounts, the artifact acquisition logs disguised as charity donations." I peered at the lines of code, the complex web of financial transactions and illicit transfers. It was the digital skeleton of Thorne's empire, now laid bare. The blinking servers, each light a heartbeat of data, were slowly but surely yielding their secrets. This was the final, irrefutable proof, the nail in the coffin of the keepers. The public revelation was swift and brutal. News headlines screamed of a centuries-old conspiracy, of stolen heritage, and the manipulation of historical narratives. Thorne, along with several high-ranking members of his organization, was apprehended. The shockwaves reverberated globally, affecting academic circles, art institutions, and even political landscapes. The stolen artifacts, from priceless Mesopotamian tablets to forgotten Roman scrolls, were slowly being recovered from private collections and hidden vaults across continents, their true origins finally acknowledged. The emotional and psychological toll, however, was profound. The relentless pursuit of truth had exacted its price. I found myself staring blankly at walls, the faces of the victims, both past and present, flashing in my mind. The historian, a man whose life was sacrificed for knowledge, and the countless others whose legacies had been twisted and erased. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by the echoes of ancient lies. I returned to my own quiet, ordered existence, but the world felt irrevocably altered. My meticulous work, once confined to the silent study of bones, had plunged me into the murky depths of human depravity and the desperate fight to reclaim truth. Forensic science, I realized, was not merely about identifying the dead or understanding the past, it was a potent weapon against those who sought to control both. They felt almost quaint now. The experience had sharpened something within me, honed a resolve that had always simmered beneath the surface. The quiet satisfaction of justice, however hard-won, was a powerful motivator. The thought was daunting, exhilarating. My future, once a clear path, now stretched out, winding and perilous, but undeniably compelling. I had found my place, not just in the past, but in the ongoing battle for its integrity.